Hi Year 4. This week I'm going to just talk you through some of the questions that you've got on your sheets that you've been set. So you've got fraction sheets this week, sheet 36 and 37. I'm just going to talk you through some of the questions on there, and also just talk to you a little bit about decimals, because you've got a question involving counting in decimals as well. So just to start with, sheet 36 is all about finding fractions of amounts. Now, these are fairly straightforward. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but I just wanted to remind you of the fraction rhyme, because that's what you need to use to work out the answers. So the fraction rhyme is you divide by the bottom and you times by the top, and that way your fraction will hit the spot. And it gives you an example of that up here. It's not written out in the best way, but it is doing the fraction rhyme. So it's taking the 180, so you always start with the total, which is the big number. So 180 is divided by the bottom, okay, and then it's going to times by the top. Okay, so you divide by the bottom here, you'd end up with 30, and then you times it by the top. Okay, now if you're happy with that, brilliant. If you're wanting a little bit more explanation about how to use that fraction rhyme, if you just would like to see an example, I have an old Pocket Teacher video, which you may well have watched when you were in Year 3, which teaches how to find a fraction of a number. And the video is over on my YouTube channel, and you'll find it if you just scroll down in the videos. It will be quite far down, but it goes through how to find a fraction of a number and talks about what you need to do and how the best way is to work it out, what the best way is to work it out. Okay, so you've got that to help you. So hopefully that will get you started with sheet 36. Now I just wanted to go through a few questions on sheet 37 and then your summer workout sheet. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is on sheet 37, and it's questions 1 to 8. Now, these are actually not that tricky, these questions at all, but they might just be a bit confusing with how it's worded. You might not be quite sure how to get started. So I'm just going to show you on paper how to get started on number 1 and number 5, and then hopefully you'll realise that it's nice and simple, really.
Okay, so for number 1, it says using fractions, count from 0 to 1 in steps of 1/5. So 1/5, and we're going to start on 0. Okay, so you're basically going to be writing down fractions, counting in 1/5. So 0, and then I'm going to have 1/5. Okay, add on another fifth, 2/5. What would the next one be? 3/5. The next one, 4/5. Another one, 5/5. Now the question says to count from 0 to 1. Now remember, with a fraction, if the numerator and the denominator, so the number at the top and the bottom, is the same, that's actually equal to a half, because if you've got a cake, you cut it into 5 pieces and you eat all 5, you've eaten the whole cake. So when we've got a fraction with the same number, top and bottom, numerator and denominator, that's a whole. So actually this one is equal to 1, so that's the point that we're going to stop. For this one here, this is the question 5 on your sheet, and it says for this section, using fractions, count back from 1 to 0 in steps of, and this one is in steps of 1/4. Okay, so we're starting from 1 this time. So how many quarters, thinking about this one here, how many quarters is the same as 1? 4 quarters. So this is actually 4 quarters. So we're going to count back from there. So we're going to take away quarters going backwards. So 3 quarters. So 4 quarters, 3 quarters, 2 quarters, 1/4, and then of course 0. So it's really not that tricky, those questions. It might just look a bit weird, a bit confusing, because It's probably not laid out in the best way, but that hopefully will show you what it means and get you started.
Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk to you about are some of the questions on your summer term workout 3 sheet. I'm just going to go down to question 3. The first 2 should be fairly straightforward. Number 3 says, cross out all the numbers that are not factors of 30. Now, I'm not sure if you've heard of the word factors before, but a factor of a number is basically a number that will go into that number. Okay, so you could multiply that number to make the total. Okay, so for example, on the ones that we've got there, one of the factors of 30 is 10, because you could multiply 10 by 3 to get to 30. So it's not about adding, it is about multiplying. And usually factors come in a pair, because they're the 2 numbers that you multiply by to get to the main number, which is 30 in this case. So the first thing you need to do is look at those numbers and cross out all the ones that don't go into 30. So you couldn't times by something to get 30. So for example, 9, 30 is not in the 9 times table, so you wouldn't get to 30 by timesing 9 by something. So 9 is not one of them, so that would be crossed out. What you need to do for the second part is, with the factors that you've got left, you need to match up the numbers that would make a pair that would multiply together to make 30. So for example, you should be left with 10 and 3 as 2 of the numbers that are left, because you can multiply both of those to get to 30. 30 is in the times table of 3 and 10. And you can do 10 times 3 or 3 times 10. So you would draw a line between those 2 numbers that are left. Okay, and then any other numbers that you have left, you see if you can also match them up so that when you multiply them together, they make 30. So the factors, if you think about it as, is 30 in this times table? So if you're thinking about the number 4, you'll think, is 30 in the 4 times table? Can I multiply 4 to get to 30? And that's how you work it out. Okay. The other one I just wanted to go through is 5 and 7, which is on the other page. Now 5 should be fairly straightforward. It's just talking about equivalent fractions. And you just need to remember that to get an equivalent fraction, which is a fraction that means the same thing, you need to multiply or divide the top and the bottom, the numerator and the denominator, by the same thing. It has to be the same thing, because otherwise the fraction would change otherwise. So this fraction has been multiplied by 4, the denominator and the numerator has been multiplied by 4. So it's ended up with 2 fractions that are actually the same. So you need to work out here what you multiply by 6 to get 12, and then do the same to 4 to give you the numerator of this fraction. And here you need to work out what you would divide by 3 to get to 1, and then do the same to 18 to give you the denominator here. Okay, so you just have to do the same to the top and the bottom. It might be timesing, it might be dividing, it depends if the numbers are getting bigger or smaller. And then the last one just to mention is number 7. It says a chocolate bar weighs 120 grams. Curtis eats 1/6 of the chocolate bar, and Tatiana eats 5/12. How many grams of the chocolate are left? Now you just need to work out 1/6 of 120, and you also need to work out 5/12 of 120. Take away both of those amounts and then see what's left. Okay, so you just have to work out 2 different fractions of 120 for that one. Right, I'm just going to look now at the questions here. The questions on this sheet, which is sheet 37, 9 to 15. This is about writing steps in a sequence, and you're using decimals. So I'm going to show you how to do this using a website. 2 different websites, just to show you and demonstrate on paper as well. Right, so let's just read this in a little more detail. So it says, write the first 6 steps in each sequence. Using decimals, count on, And then you've got in tenths, in hundredths, in tenths, in hundredths, and it's given you a starting number. The second section is asking you to count back, so you're going backwards and getting smaller. So this is a bit like counting in a sequence. If it said count in steps of 2 from 10, you would go 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. But instead of counting in whole numbers, you're counting in decimals. And it's wanting you to count in either tenths or hundredths. Now, last week on the video, I showed you a website called Moving Digits, and it helped to give an example of the different columns that we've got in our place value and the decimal places. I'm just going to show you that again, just to have a look to remind us where the tenths column is and where the hundredths column is. Then I'm going to show you another website which you'll be able to use to help you answer these questions. So we used this website last time when we were multiplying and dividing by 10 and 100 and 1,000. And you can use the numbers at the top, as you know, to make different numbers here and with decimals. Now the main thing I wanted just to look at, just to remind us before we move on to another website, is that where you've got the decimal, so you've got your thousands, hundreds, tens, units, then you've got your decimal, and then you're into the bits of numbers, so that the decimal places where actually it's not whole numbers anymore, it's just bits of numbers, a bit like fractions are bits of numbers. And the first column in the decimal places are actually tenths. The second column are the hundredths, and the third column are the thousandths, because remember each column is 10 times either bigger if you're going to the left or 10 times smaller if you're going to the right. So the first column are tenths, the second column in the decimals are the hundredths, and the third column are the thousandths. Now we don't need the thousandths today because the question is only asking us to count in steps of tenths and hundredths. So we're using 2 decimal places today. Now you might have seen this website as well. I'm not sure whether I've showed you this one before, Flip Counter, but this one can be used just to count with your place value with units, tens, hundreds, thousands, and it can be a good way of practicing your place value and how things, when they get to 9, they always tick over into the next column. But what you can also do on this website, which is really cool, is that there's a box at the top here, which is a little bit hard to see, but it says drag and drop decimals. And if you click on that, there's a decimal point that appears, and you can move that decimal point wherever you like it. And so you can have 1 decimal place here, or you could put the decimal point in this position and have 2 decimal places, or you could have 3 decimal places, or you could even have 4 decimal places. Now, because we're looking at tenths and hundredths, which is just the first 2 decimal places, as we saw on there, I'm going to put the decimal point here to give us the tenths and the hundredths, and then we've got our units, tens and hundreds here. Okay, so we could have the number 12.13, for example, 12.13. So these are our tenths, these are our hundredths for our decimal places. Okay, now we're going to have a look at some examples of the questions that were on your sheet that I've got on paper. I'm going to show it to you now, and then we'll work out the answer using this website. And I would recommend that you use this website too if you need to when you're doing your homework. So let's have a little look at the examples that I have got written down.
Okay, so the first example I've got written is count in tenths from 7.8. So we're going to do 7.8 and then we're going to do 6 steps, so 6 of the next numbers in the sequence. So we're going to count in tenths from 7.8. Right, so let's have a look at that website and see how we can work it out.
Okay, so I've set this one up with 7.8 and we're going to be counting in tenths. Now you'll notice that there is a 0 in the hundredth position here. And if you watched the video last time, you would have heard me say that actually this is not important. This 0 in the decimal place, if it's right on the end of the decimal places, you don't actually need to write it at all, which is why in my book it was just 7.8. We actually don't need the 0, but this website puts the 0 in because we're using the hundredths. But it doesn't mean anything. If the 0 was before the 8, so it was 0, 8, then it would be a very important 0 because it'll be a placeholder. But when they're right on the end, in the decimal places, when it's right on the end, you don't need to write them down because it's just telling you you've got no more. So it's not needed. But we'll leave it there for now. So we've got 7.8 and we need to count in tenths, 6 steps, and we'll write them down. Now remember, we've got our decimal point here, which means that on this side we've got units, tens and hundreds. So we've got 7 units here, 7 whole ones, and then 0.8. So then we've got a bit of a number. So 7 whole ones and 0.8, which is actually tenths. So this column is the tenths column, and because we're counting in tenths, we're going to be adding on tenths. So I'm going to click on the plus sign and start adding on tenths. So we need to do 6 of these, and this will be what we write down. So the next one is 7.9. The next one is 8.0. So actually this one could just be written as 8, because if it's point and then nothing afterwards, you don't need any of this decimal place at all. So you could just write down 8 for this one. But then if I do another tenth, we'll need the decimals back. So 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4. Okay, so that's what we'll write down in our sequence. So I'll write that down now, and then we'll have a look at the next one.
Right, so 7.8, 7.9, 8.0 if you want to, or just 8, 8.1, 8.2, 8.3 and 8.4. Okay, let's look at the next one. Count in hundredths from 1. So starting from 1, we need to find the next 6 in the sequence, counting in hundredths from 1. Let's have a look at it on the website.
Okay, so we're counting from 1 this time, and we're counting in hundredths. So remember, we've got the decimal point here, which means this first column, this is the tenths, and the next column are the hundredths. Okay, so 10 times smaller again. So a piece of cake cut into 100 pieces. Okay, hundredths. So we're starting from 1. Now again, it's given us 0.00. We can just write that as 1. We don't need the zeros here with the decimals, because it just tells us there's nothing else. But we're going to need them in a minute. So we're starting from 1 and we're counting in hundredths. So I'm going to be adding here in the last column this time and adding on hundredths. Okay, so the tenths aren't going to change at the moment, but they might do as we move on. So let's just add hundredths. So 1, 1.01, 1.02, 1.03, 1.04, 1.05 and 1.06. Okay, so we've just added on hundredths. Now that's all we need to fill in our gaps, but if I just keep going for a minute, when we get to 1.09, remember when we get to 9 in a column, it passes over to the next column to become 1 more in the next column and then starts again from 0. So let's have a look. So that would change to 1.1, and then you can continue counting hundredths if you wanted to after that. Great, so let's write that one in and have a look at the next one.
Okay, so 1.01, 1.02, 1.03, 1.04, 1.05 and 1.06. So this is the hundredth place here, as opposed to the tenths, which we were doing up there. And the last one is count back in hundredths from 2.6. So we're doing hundredths again, but the change this time is that we're going backwards. Okay, so we're going to get smaller, we're going backwards, and we're starting from 2.6. Let's work it out online.
Okay, so for this one, we're counting back, remember. We're starting on 2.6 and we're counting back. And we're counting back in hundredths. Okay, so a bit like the last one, we're using this second decimal column here, but we're counting back, so I'm going to be taking away rather than adding. Okay, so 2.60, which is the same thing, is going to turn into 2.59, because remember, if you take one away, it's going to jump everything down. So we were on 2.6. We can't take away 1 from 0. So what happens is it exchanges. So we end up with 5 left in the tenths, and then 9 can be put in the hundredths. So then we count down 2.59, 2.58, 2.57, 2.56, 2.55, and 2.54. And that's where we get to with our gaps on our page. If I kept going, the same thing would happen here. 2.50, okay, can't take away another one from the 0, so we exchange over. The 5 will change into a 4, and then the 9 will be moved over there so that we can start taking away again. Excellent. Okay, so hopefully that will help you with those questions on your sheet. Just make sure you look closely as to whether you're counting on or counting back, and whether you're counting in tenths or you're counting in hundredths. And I will put the link to this website underneath the video, because I recommend using it. It might feel like cheating, but you could always use it for some of them, and then try some of them on your own and use it to check. But when you're getting to grips with decimals, it's a good idea to be able to see something visually. So I do recommend having a go and having a look at it, even if it's just to check your answers. Remember, to get the decimal point up, you need to click on the drag and drop decimal box at the top, and then you can put the decimal point like we have here. So we've got 2 decimal places on this place here. Brilliant. So remember, there's the old fraction video to help you with the other page, to do the fraction rhyme, divide by the bottom, times by the top. And you've got this resource to help you with the decimal questions on your sheet. And hopefully now I've explained those other questions on your summer workout sheet, like the factors and the fraction questions, then that should be a bit easier as well. So I hope that helps. Have a wonderful week, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.